Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to our Work and Welfare Subcommittee hearing this morning. I want to welcome our witnesses here on our subcommittee hearing titled Modernizing Child Welfare to Protect Vulnerable Children. And so grateful to have the opportunity to have this hearing this morning. I'm going to begin with an opening statement here and then turn it over to my colleague, Ranking Member Danny Davis, and then we'll introduce our witnesses here today. So welcome, everybody. I want to, first of all, thank everyone for joining us today for this hearing. My name is Darren LaHood, a congressman from the 16th Congressional District covering much of central Illinois and northwest parts of Illinois. This hearing begins our committee's important work this Congress on evaluating challenges faced by Americans' most vulnerable children within our nation's child welfare system. As chairman of the Work and Welfare Subcommittee, I have tremendous respect for the longstanding bipartisan work that has been done by this subcommittee to reform and fortify the safety net for children who have experienced the trauma and hardships of abuse and neglect. In 2018, this subcommittee paved the way for a significant bipartisan victory with the passage of the Family First Prevention Services Act. That legislation transformed Congress's approach to child welfare by moving away from the historic practice of providing funding solely after a child entered foster care and directing resources toward evidence-based prevention services to keep families together. In 2020, under the exemplary leadership of Ranking Member Davis and former Ranking Member Jackie Walorski, this subcommittee worked to provide critical resources and much-needed support to foster youth during the pandemic. Child welfare policy has seen significant changes in recent years, but with nearly 400,000 children in foster care, more needs to be done. The purpose of this hearing is to review a program within our subcommittee's jurisdiction called Title 4B. Title 4B is less than an endearing name, but the program needs to be reauthorized. As you will hear from our witnesses today, this program plays a pivotal role in family preservation and providing flexible funding to states and tribes to promote the safety, permanence, and well-being of children in foster care. The program was first created in 1935 with the original passage of the Social Security Act and expanded in 1993 to include a new subpart called Promoting Safe and Stable Families. Title 4B as a whole has not had any significant reform since 2008. I strongly believe it is our responsibility and obligation to ensure government programs are meeting today's needs and that they are maximizing the impact of taxpayer dollars. Too often, Congress creates a program and then fails to circle back and ask, what has come of our investment? How can this funding complement other federal programs that serve similar populations? This perpetuates a social safety net that is siloed and disconnected. We have a unique opportunity to modernize and reimagine the function and structure of Title 4B, building on the success of the Family First Act, while maintaining the flexibility that states rely on. Earlier this month, I sat down with Commissioner Rebecca Jones-Gaston of the Administration of Children, Youth, and Families at the Department of HHS. Our conversation was very productive and revealed a number of areas where Title 4B could be improved. In addition, stakeholders from both sides of the aisle have highlighted persistent challenges. Title 4B could be where it could be reformed to address, including some of our witnesses that will speak today. These include improving outcomes for the 19,000 youth aging out of foster care each year, supporting the grandparents and family members caring for the 2.5 million children who might otherwise enter foster care, strengthening the capacity of family courts, and ensuring legal representation and transparency for parents, fulfilling the promise of family resource centers to provide upstream interventions that catch families before they fail, and addressing the nationwide shortage of caseworkers. Families form the bedrock of a strong society, and it is crucial to have a child welfare system in place that supports children in moments of crisis and keeps families intact whenever possible. I look forward to the insights and valuable testimony of our witnesses that they'll provide today as they shed light on various components and programs funded through Title 4B. Together, we can find lasting bipartisan solutions to address the challenges facing vulnerable children and families. I want to thank our witnesses and our guests for being here today and look forward to your testimony. With that, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member, Mr. Danny Davis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank each one of our witnesses for being here with us today, and I thank all of those who have come. Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to be a part of the long tradition in the Ways and Means Committee of enacting important bipartisan legislation to improve foster care and better prevent child abuse and neglect. I want to continue this tradition in partnership with you, and I appreciate your thoughtful assembly of our panel of experts today. I would be remiss if I did not note that in just 2 days, the Republican leadership's inability to govern our chamber will likely mean that the authorization and funding for the programs we are discussing today will expire. Many parents will lose their child care, and the federal government will shut down, cutting off lifelines for many needy families. I hope we can work together to persuade your colleagues to prevent a shutdown and continue the foster care-related programs under Title 4B while we work on a bipartisan reauthorization law that puts children first. I was disappointed that recent Republican proposals did not include a 4B extension. Like other states, our home state of Illinois struggles to meet our goal of permanent homes within 18 months for the 21,000 Illinois children in foster care. Although children from all races and ethnicities suffer from abuse and neglect at similar rates, Black children are overrepresented at each decision point in the child welfare system. Further, Black and American Indian, Alaska Native youth are more likely than their peers to be placed in foster care and remain in care. Clearly, we have work to do. Youth who have experienced foster care advise me that the best way to fix the foster care system is to help families from the start. 4B programs to assist families while youth are in foster care are a key part of that continuum. So are the essential services that prevent youth from entering foster care and subsidized guardianship programs that help them exit. 4B programs fund other key tools to help children in foster care, including the Court Improvement Program that supports family courts, the regional partnership grants that successfully coordinate services for families struggling with substance abuse, caseworker visits and family stabilization that make it safe for children to go home. Pardon me here. a wide range of assistance to adopted families and kinship guardians that gives a helping hand to go with their boundless love. I believe we must do even more to strengthen families, reduce time in care, and address racial disparities. For example, by providing legal services to parents and children to represent their interests, by preserving the bonds between children and their incarcerated parents, and by providing mentors with lived experience to youth and parents. The reality is that stabilizing families and keeping children safe requires additional investments, yet 4B funding has staggered since 2006. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel of witnesses today and from my colleagues about their priorities for these important programs so that we can work together to make smart, practical investments to protect vulnerable youth and strengthen families. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing, and yield back the balance of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We'll now move to introduce our witnesses here today. Our first witness, Mr. David Sanders, is the Executive Vice President of Systems Improvement at Casey Family Programs. Our next witness after that will be Ms. Tracy Gruber, is the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Health and Human Services. We'll next hear from Sheree Kraft, who is the founding CEO and Executive Director of the Smart from the Start program in Washington, D.C. We'll next hear from Catherine Marquardt, who is the Recruitment Manager for the Foster Adopt Connect program in Missouri. And then lastly, we'll hear from Ms. Prudence Beedler Carr, who is the Center Director for the American Bar Association Center on Children and Law. With that, Dr. Sanders, we'll begin with you, and you're recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee. My name is David Sanders, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Systems Improvement for Casey Family Programs. Casey Family Programs is the nation's largest operating foundation focused on reducing the need for foster care in the United States. Thank you for inviting me here today. I want to thank this subcommittee for its vision and commitment to conversations and policy development whose goal is to improve the lives of vulnerable families. I'm going to focus on 2 issues during my brief presentation, and you have my written testimony, which is more comprehensive. First, I'll give some highlights on the history of Title 4B. Second, I'll provide some recommendations on the reauthorization of 4B to continue the child welfare momentum this Congress has created. Federal child protection policy has always prioritized the safety of children as paramount in any decision. We know from research that the most effective way to keep children safe is to strengthen families and to seek to mitigate any risk to the safety of the child. This means the goal is to keep children safe with their families, not safe from their families. This subcommittee over the past decades has advanced many significant pieces of legislation to fund state, territory, and tribal efforts for children to remain safely with their families, most recently with the historic passage of Family First. Alongside Family First, the funding and priorities supported through Title 4B programs provide critical dedicated child welfare funding to strengthen families and ensure children do not stay in foster care one day longer than necessary. 4B, the Mary Lee Allen Promoting Safe and Stable Families program, was created in the 90s. The creation of this program brought new additional funding for family support and family preservation services to families with children, including foster care, adoptive, and extended families. As part of the Adoptions and Safe Families Act in 1997, the allowable use of PSF funds were expanded to include time-limited family reunification and adoption promotion and support services. Thanks to the leadership and vision of this subcommittee, Family First became law in 2018. The landmark legislation fundamentally shifted how the federal government partners with states, territories, and tribes in the protection of children and strengthening of families. I would note the 2 programs are different. Family First focuses on children right at the doorstep of foster care, and Title IV-B provides more flexibility for states to address issues at an earlier point and strengthen families who might be at risk. However, the most important question is, has congressional action impacted outcomes for vulnerable children in a positive way? If the goal is to have more children safely with their families, the answer is yes. From 2005 to 2021, the number of children in foster care has declined by 23%. The number of Black children in care has declined by 47%, and this has been accomplished without compromising safety as measured by recurrence of maltreatment and reentry into foster care. Things are far from perfect, and I don't intend to present an overly Pollyanna view, but the key point is that this subcommittee has identified issues and used 4B and 4E to improve outcomes for children. I'm going to close on the two issues that, based on data, call for addressing by this subcommittee. First, while several safety measures have shown improvement in the nation's child protection system, child abuse and neglect fatalities continue to rise nationally. Given the priority on safety, this is a glaring issue that requires this subcommittee's leadership to address, and this is an issue that can be addressed. Industries including aviation and healthcare have dealt with low-incidence, high-impact occurrences using safety science, and we believe child protection can do the same. 4B, with the focus of supporting families, can be a key tool in addressing this issue. Second, the over 300,000 kids, almost 400,000, in foster care are in care for an average of 21.7 months. Think about that for a second. You might first picture a 17-year-old and might feel somewhat mollified, but now picture a 2-year-old. We have tens of thousands of children in this country in foster care who have only briefly, if ever, experienced the support, comfort, and caring of a permanent family. Foster parents do an incredible job, but foster care is by definition short-term. We have allowed an intervention designed as temporary to be the primary tool to keep children safe, and we are harming thousands of children a day by not providing them the security they need. 4B, again, can be a tool in strengthening families to accomplish this goal. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. We'll now recognize Director Gruber.
Good morning, Subcommittee Chair LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Tracy Gruber, the Executive Director at the Utah Department of Health and Human Services, which includes our state's Child Welfare Agency, our Division of Child and Family Services, or DCFS. Thank you for the invitation to highlight Utah's experiences leveraging federal funding to strengthen families and protect children from abuse and neglect. Your efforts to modernize our nation's child welfare system will help families. Today, I'll talk about how modernization means streamlining requirements and giving states flexibility to administer federal dollars according to shared outcomes that are informed by data. Title IV-B reauthorization is the perfect time to do this, but first I want to share a success story. Recently, DCFS became involved with a family of 5. During a DCFS in-home visit, we learned the family was struggling to make ends meet and was at risk of losing their home. They relied on food from the local food bank, and their 3 children were on the brink of needing foster care services. DCFS connected the family to short-term resources to pay rent and access to medical care for one of their children. These services were funded with Title IV-B and allowed 3 children to stay safely in their home, saving significant state and federal dollars. In other cases, we connect families to parenting skills classes. The Family First Prevention Services Act is truly an investment in prevention. So here is our nation's opportunity. How can these critical prevention activities expanded in Family First become the centerpiece of child welfare? Though 4B funding is a mere 2.5% of our state's overall child welfare budget, it carries important flexibility which states need to strengthen families and keep children safe from abuse and neglect. We're proud of Utah's successes in using this funding, but here are just 2 of our challenges. Federal requirements such as set-asides and funding thresholds in 4B hamper our ability to provide the services and interventions needed within our unique communities. And Title IV-E prevention requires programs to meet time-intensive and costly rigorous evaluation thresholds on the Prevention Clearinghouse. This hampers innovation. Now, despite this, we leveraged 4E funding for a uniquely Utah service, Families First, a parenting skills program recently placed on the clearinghouse. When approved, we expanded the service to families who are 4E and 4B eligible. This shift to 4E freed up additional 4B funds, which we used to establish another new parenting skills program for adults who are lower functioning. The current funding scheme is also challenging to administer. Title IV-B reauthorization is the perfect opportunity to reduce these burdens. In doing so, states will have more capacity to serve families. A reduction in administrative burdens could include focusing on outcomes by allowing states to combine multiple funding streams to pilot comprehensive approaches for people in our services. And what about the people who serve? Ensuring the best outcomes for kids requires a stable and skilled workforce. We can't ignore their needs. The funding must afford states opportunities to support the well-being of our workforce so they're professionally and emotionally equipped to meet the needs of the children they serve. To truly modernize the child welfare system to protect America's most vulnerable children, we must find ways to expand flexibility, eliminate set-asides, reduce administrative burdens, and focus on outcomes. This hearing is a great starting point to highlight the opportunities to modernize this complex system. My written statement provides a deeper look into the Utah child welfare system, supports the case for added flexibility, and highlights our challenges, including 37% staff turnover, and how Utah has innovated through these challenges. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Director Gruber. We'll next turn to Sheree Kraft, Executive Director of SMART from the START program. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking Chairman LaHood and Ranking Member Davis for giving me this opportunity to testify before the committee this morning. I am the founder, CEO, and executive director of SMART from the Start, which is a trauma-informed family support and community engagement organization that has as its mission to promote the healthy development of young children, youth, and families living in underserved communities by providing them the tools, resources, and supports they need to thrive. SMART's multi-generational evidence-based programming is embedded in communities where other social service agencies and providers do not go and where some of the highest rates of child welfare involvement exist. SMART works with families to identify and build upon positive attributes and protective factors, employing a strengths-based approach to mitigate the effects of trauma, economic hardship, and negative social determinants of health to promote wellness. I grew up between the cities of Boston and DC and have spent my childhood living in a low-income housing community that closely resembles those of SMART's neighborhoods. I know firsthand the incredible strengths, gifts, and resilience of our families and have a broad understanding of the challenges in their origin. I hire my team from the community we serve. Those roots ensure that our staff have the skills, deep understanding, and empathy necessary to provide and build and grow impactful relationships. Having walked the walk in the same tiny shoes as the young children and families we now fight for, we bring a unique perspective and unrivaled passion to this work. I also share the experience of being a foster, kinship, and adoptive parent and have raised 5 children. I've witnessed firsthand the staggering dysfunction of our child welfare system and will tell you from my extensive personal and professional experience that the best way to prevent children from being traumatized by the system is to invest heavily in programs to strengthen families, increase the number of family resource centers across the country, particularly in under-resourced communities, to prevent children from entering the system in the first place. That is the mission of the Families First DC initiative funded by 4B in the Bowser administration. What we know unequivocally is that we cannot serve a child in isolation from their family, and we cannot serve a family in isolation from their community. If our children are going to thrive, we must ensure that we're helping families to create environments that are conducive to healthy development, as well as safe and supportive communities. It is vital to stand up community-based family resource centers like those funded by 4B that serve as a one-stop shopping center where families can simultaneously engage in early education, adult and parenting education, mental health counseling and advocacy, and where caregivers can learn about budgeting and banking, pursue professional development and career opportunities, get help with a resume, a bag of diapers, groceries, and even winter coats for their children. When families have one place in their community that serves as a beacon of support and provides voluntary, non-stigmatizing, strength-based, and empowering programs and services, they enthusiastically and actively participate and are eager to make change. We must invest in upstream, holistic, evidence-based family wellness programming that ensures that children and family never end up in circumstances that result in involvement with the child welfare system in the first place. When families do have open cases and children removed, easy access to support, advocacy, and resources is essential in ensuring that service plans created for families are fair, that they are able to easily access the services mandated, and that they have safe local visitation centers when necessary to continue to engage with their children until they are reunified. To do all of that, collaborative public-private partnerships like Family First DC, funded through DC's Child and Family Services Agency under Title 4B, must be available to children and families in every community. This funding must continue and it must be expanded. This unprecedented partnership that is the cornerstone of our initiative gives vetted community-based organizations with proven track records of successfully serving families the infrastructure and long-term funding stability to offer the most comprehensive one-stop shopping model of family support that I know of. At the same time, DC gives us the autonomy through Title 4B to create programs and services that meet the unique needs of each of our communities. This neighborhood-based model for prevention and support is what will keep our families strong and unified and children at home and out of the system. This initiative is a national model of best practice. In conclusion, I ask you to imagine a country where every child in every city has the opportunity to benefit from a neighborhood family success center. Imagine an America where every child can enjoy fun, enriching educational experiences, where their families have their basic needs and supports met, as well as counseling and a path to self-sufficiency in the middle class and beyond. Imagine a country where we are able to keep all families together and thriving, and where entire communities change. Thank you for your time and for your support of the essential life-changing work that makes this possible in our communities.
Thank you, Ms. Kraft. We'll now recognize Ms. Marquardt for your 5 minutes.
Thank you and good morning, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and the other members of this committee. My name is Catherine Marquardt, and I was previously employed in child welfare with the state of Missouri for 5 years, 3 of which were frontline case management. When my position as an adoption specialist was eliminated due to budget restrictions, I found my way to a nonprofit organization called Foster Adopt Connect, where I'm currently employed. This agency works to place children with their relatives and kin via a few programs, but the one I'm going to focus on today is 30 Days to Family. I currently oversee this program at our agency. While I was at Children's Division for the state of Missouri, I had upwards of 30 cases on my caseload, and when I was leaving Children's Division, many workers had more than 50. In an ideal world, you would have between 15 to 20 cases so that you can truly focus your time and energy onto making positive change for those families. 50 cases per worker is just an unrealistic number to manage and really puts workers at a higher risk of burnout and compassion fatigue, in addition to their already higher likelihood of developing secondary trauma due to the sole nature of this job. This is one of the many reasons why added mental health services for frontline workers is vital. If an agency is able to retain their workers, they have a better chance of sending children home with their parents. With this in mind, added mental health services for the case managers leads to better outcomes for the children and their families. Many agencies, the state of Missouri included, did not have the time, resources, or energy to devote to the children and their families, much less to devote to additional tasks such as relative and kinship location and placement. That is where 30 Days to Family comes in. Kinship care is when the child is placed in the home of a relative or a family friend to which the child has some sort of existing relationship. 30 Days to Family is a program designed to come in at the very start of a case and provide intensive short-term services to increase the number of children placed in relative and kinship homes within the first 30 days of entering foster care. 30 Days to Family is a highly beneficial program that really supports the current legislation in Missouri regarding diligent search for relatives. This legislation requires Missouri Children's Division to complete multiple tasks to provide diligent efforts to show location of family. 30 Days to Family does every single one of these tasks within the allotted time frame as part of their program. Before this act, the Families First Prevention Services Act was put in place in 2018. This opened many doors for many programs, including 30 Days to Family, and hammered home the need for children to be in the least restrictive setting, so long as it is safe and appropriate. This act put in place many prevention services to keep children safely in their homes. In addition to this, it also highlighted the need for children to be with family, i.e. the least restrictive setting. Families First provided the opportunity for reimbursement of state funds from the federal dollars to provide access to many things such as mental health services and substance use treatment. This also heavily influenced the government agencies to look harder at their nonprofit Family Resource Center counterparts, such as Foster Adopt Connect, which had many prevention programs, including family location services via 30 Days to Family. 30 Days to Family has proven that the children served in this program are likely to have fewer moves between placements, fewer behavioral challenges, higher satisfaction with their living situation, better relationships with their families, faster reunification with parents, and a lower chance of re-entering foster care. In addition to these outcomes, the children are also less likely to require services such as extreme family finding later in the family's case. Additionally, 70% of children served in this program are placed with a relative or kin, and 80% of those served remained with that family at their most recent update. And children who participated in the 30 Days to Family program are on average in care 91 days less than those who are not. All this to say, it has been proven time and time again that by and large, relatives and kin placements are the best practice for when children must enter foster care. Entering foster care always means some sort of major change in the lives of children, but kin can help ease that discomfort, especially when the home and the kin in the home are already familiar to that child. Locating relatives and kinship is an arduous process, one that many agencies don't have the time or resources to devote, but we do. 30 Days to Family is an amazing program that really takes tasks off the plates of our state counterparts and puts relatives and kinship as Plan A for those children in care who cannot safely remain with their parents. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide testimony on this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Marquardt. We'll now recognize Ms. Beedler Carr, the Center Director for the American Bar Association Center for Children in Law. You're welcome. 5 minutes.
Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for having me here today and the opportunity to provide testimony. I am here on behalf of the ABA Center on Children in the Law, which was established in 1978 and works collaboratively with attorneys, judges, and the courts across the country to promote access to justice for children, parents, and families. In addition to serving as the center director, I am a lawyer by training and have worked on wide-ranging issues of constitutional law, which I will explain shortly. This brief statement will cover the following points. First, I will explain how child welfare is both a social services and a legal sector. Second, I will demonstrate that child welfare law has an extremely large reach in our country. Third, I will give examples of why child welfare law is especially complex. And finally, I will highlight how Congress's Title IV-B investment in the Court Improvement Program has provided invaluable support to this legal sector for the past 3 decades. As you have heard from the other witnesses, child welfare work is comprised of a system of services. It is also comprised of a system of laws. Last term, the Supreme Court explained in Burkeen v. Holland, a case concerning the Indian Child Welfare Act, that child welfare is governed by both federal and state law. These laws are primarily designed to protect parents' rights and children's rights. They also address government responsibilities to protect its community members. In child welfare work, the relationship between individual rights and government responsibilities begins most concretely at the time of a Child Protective Services investigation. More than 37% of all children in this country will experience a CPS investigation before they turn 18. I want you to focus on that number, 37% of all children in America. Most parents do not think about this at the time of bringing a child into the world, that we have a 1 in 3 chance of experiencing a government investigation into our families and our homes before raising that child from infancy to adulthood. I suspect even in this room, most of us know someone in our own family networks and communities who has experienced an investigation. Traditionally, parents have not had attorneys during that investigation. That is beginning to change. If a CPS investigation leads to a child's removal from their family, the case transitions into a more formal court process. State courts oversee the cases of roughly 610,000 children in foster care each year. As a comparison, state courts hear about 75,000 real property cases. In other words, the child welfare docket is approximately 8 times larger than property law. In addition to its massive reach, child welfare law includes structural elements that make it especially complex. For example, in the majority of civil and criminal cases, judges are required to apply the law to a set of facts that happened in the past. In child welfare cases, judges must examine 3 different time periods. They must look backward at government allegations supporting removal. They must look at current facts related to a parent's implementation of case plan services and requirements, and they must make future predictions about what will be in a child's best interest. None of that is easy. As I mentioned, I have a background in constitutional law. I have worked on First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, and 10th Amendment cases that have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court addressing complicated national security, immigration, and maritime law topics. There is no area of law I have ever worked on that is more complex than child welfare. In recognition of the high stakes for children and families and the connection between services and law, Congress established the Court Improvement Program in 1993 through bipartisan legislation. CIP grants enhance collaboration between the courts and child welfare agencies. The program is budgeted at $30 million a year, distributed across all 50 states, U.S. territories, and recognized tribes. The funds go to the Supreme Court in each jurisdiction with a base amount and additional funding according to child population. For example, the Alaska CIP receives $290,000, while Texas CIP receives $1.8 million annually. These CIP grants are the only federal funds that state courts receive for child welfare work. In 2020, again acting through bipartisan legislation, Congress authorized $10 million in emergency CIP funding to facilitate time-sensitive investments in things like Zoom licenses and trainings on how to hold remote hearings. That investment was invaluable in mitigating the risk of case delays when courts initially had to shut down. In recognition of the value of this program, and because annual funding has not changed since 2006, the President's budget in both the current and prior administrations have proposed an additional $30 million in CIP funding through Title IV-B. Recent legislative proposals, including by those in this room, have also supported CIP expansion. We commend Congress for focusing on the importance of this program from 1993 to today and for recognizing that child welfare is a large and complex legal sector. Thank you again for holding this hearing and for providing me an opportunity to testify.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge and thank all of you for your very substantive statements here this morning. And we'll now turn to the question and answer portion of the hearing, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. In government, we often add to programs over time in our quest for improvement. Regrettably, this approach often results in fragmented and complex systems that burden administrators and hinder families from receiving the support they need. And I think we heard a little bit about that from all of you today. Title IV-B represents 4% of federal funding for child welfare, yet it is entangled in a multitude of sub-programs, many with their own unique requirements and funding structures. This chart that I've put up over my left shoulder and on the monitors here behind me looks at, is a visual representation of the 2 subparts of Title IV-B. As you can see, these parts were established at separate points in time and over the years have grown into a number of offshoots. There is no cohesive structure or set of singular outcomes that this funding is designed to achieve. The agency responsible for administrating Title IV-B aptly likens its funding structure to a game of, quote, chutes and ladders, a comparison that resonates with many of us, and I know you here today. Obviously, I think we can do better to modernize the program. That's part of why we're here today, while keeping with the flexibility to address critical needs we just heard from all of you. I'm going to start with Director Gruber. As the administrator of the program in the state of Utah, I'm wondering if you could comment on the structure of Title IV-B, how we can improve it, update it, make it more efficient, effective, and accountable, and maybe some of the challenges you face.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And the system is both legally and administratively complex for the reasons that you describe. In Utah, like so many other states, and it's truthfully not completely unique to this funding, federal funding is very complex, and I think that the flexibility that Title B affords warrants recognition. I do think that there are more opportunities to provide that flexibility and shift to a more outcome-focused framework for child welfare. Identify as the policymakers that you want, the outcomes that you want states to achieve for families and children in the child welfare system, and allow states the flexibility to address those challenges and achieve those outcomes, meeting the needs of their communities, which are also completely unique. In terms of Title IV-B funding, I think an elimination of the set-asides would be one thing that we would really recommend. All of our states are not the same, all of our communities are not the same, and that would be one place where we would recommend starting. And the percentages of those funds that need to be spent is another area that we would recommend looking into.
Thank you for that. I'll now switch to Ms. Sheree Kraft. Obviously, you talked about your program and experience. I'm very impressed by the focus you put on data and tracking outcomes of the families you serve. Currently, we don't have much visibility into the outcomes from Title IV-B. What are the right outcomes we should be focused on at the federal level to help us better understand the impact of the program?
Thank you, Chairman LaHood, and thank you for the question as well. We need to be tracking outcomes as they relate to family, child, youth, and community well-being. Those outcomes should be related specifically to indicators such as economic self-sufficiency and mobility, social supports, educational achievement for kids, families, and adults. We should be looking at family functioning as a whole in terms of outcomes with co-parenting, drilling down to things as specific as parenting methods and, spanking and, positive parenting redirection. Our outcomes related to child well-being are social emotional, they're physical, they're developmental. Outcomes for youth in terms of their academic achievement, what their social supports are. All of these things are indicators of overall well-being that are precursors or protective factors for children, youth, and families entering the child welfare system. So we look at a whole variety of long-term and short-term outcomes as they relate to all facets of child, youth, and family well-being, including those that are economic, including those that are in physical health, mental health, social supports, and community supports as well.
Thank you for that. Those are my questions. I'll turn to the ranking member, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Sanders, first let me thank the Casey Family Programs for the excellent work it has done and continues to do. When we look at Title IV funding and recognize that it has been stagnant since 2006, what strategic investments should we consider to strengthen Title IV-B to prevent maltreatment, the unnecessary separation of children from their families, and promote reunification with families?
Thank you for the question. I would emphasize the importance of 4E and 4B combining to support families. That and providing that support as early as possible, which 4B allows. The challenge with Family First is that often children have to be identified as being at risk, and that presents challenges in and of itself. It's critical for families to be able to access the supports they need to care for their children. And there are two areas that I would emphasize. One is what I mentioned earlier, and that is the length of time that children spend in care. Some of the support that's been provided for kin navigator programs, for example, as part of 4B, are vital. But we should, and as a country, we should be looking at kin being used much more than they are right now in the child protection system. One of the reasons that we have many of the challenges that we do with having enough placements for children is because we aren't utilizing kin. We aren't finding them, we aren't utilizing them, and we aren't supporting them. And so I think that's one strategic area that 4B could be focused on. I think a second is if we look at what happens with tribal children and American Indian children, they have struggled in the child protection system, and the resources that are provided to tribes are very limited under 4B right now. And I think that's a second area that I would emphasize as a strategic area to focus on.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kraft, could you elaborate a bit on how programs in 4B really can go from the start, from the beginning, to assist families?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Davis. Yes, we believe that by providing families in their communities where they live with easy access to supports, including prenatal classes, including parenting education, including access to crisis intervention programming and advocacy right in the communities where they live, we give them an opportunity before they get into situations where they're unable to dial things back. We give them access to resources to help them to deal with challenges that, most families face. We provide for our communities access within walking distance. We are embedded in many public housing developments here in Washington, D.C., where families can walk over and get a winter coat, a bag of food, access to support if they're in a domestic violence situation, if they need help with a child who's having challenges at school. We have advocates, we have early childhood professionals, we have mental health professionals, we have education and employment opportunities right in their community where they can walk right over that are run by people who represent the diversity of their community and who have roots in their community. One great example of this is our LEAP program for young men between the ages of 16 and 24. Many of these young men are fathers. And a number of them come to us, they've had some challenges in their past and need some support. They come to us, we enroll them in the LEAP program, which provides them with professional development and enrichment. It provides them with, those of them who are parenting skills. Everyone gets a therapeutic mentor, and they set short and long-term goals for their stability, self-sufficiency, parenting, and long-term success. In that program, that demographic has gone from almost a 90% recidivism rate for those who have been involved in the criminal justice system to an under 8% recidivism rate at our Success Center. And that is because we provide them with programs and services that are run by folks who understand what they've been through, but also have the skills and the professionalism to give them what they need to set and achieve goals that they actually can accomplish, and keeps them out of the system, in the community. One example is a young man who came to us, had been incarcerated at 17, young father. As soon as he came home at 21, his community directed him to Smart from the Start. He came to us, we enrolled him in our professional development and enrichment program. He got his first job at the DC Housing Authority, and he's still there. 86% of these young men are still employed after 2 years.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. Recognize Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a critical issue in my mind, caring for vulnerable children. It's one of the most important things I think that we could do. And I appreciate all what each and every one of you do, especially supporting children before they may enter the foster care system, or maybe preventing them from even needing to go into foster care because of improvements that can be made in their lives. And I think that intervening early in a child's life and intervening early in a family with a very young child is extremely important. I've been involved for years with a program in Cincinnati called Boys Hope, Girls Hope. And the earlier you have these kids enter the program, usually the better the results. And these are situations where parents decide that we don't have the right environment for our child in our home. And maybe it's a single parent, but maybe it's a mother and a father in the home. And it could be for a lot of reasons, drugs, domestic violence. But they want the best for their child, so they enter in this program, they live at this home, they have mentors, they're safe, they're fed, they go to good schools. And the parents are not separated. They're still part of this whole process. And so there's a variety of ways that we can do this, but I think the younger the child is in that safe environment, the better off things can be. There was a young man, a lot of these kids, they come into the program kicking and screaming, but he went to my high school, St. Xavier High School, his senior year. He never played football. Coach says, come out for football. He starts at defensive end. He makes first team All-State. They win the state. He's going to any college he wants. He plays for Louisville. He goes to the NFL, wins 2 Super Bowl rings. Coaches then at the University of Cincinnati. Now he's a defensive coach for the New York Jets. That opportunity would never have happened if he didn't have this opportunity and he wasn't separated from his family. When he was 17 years old, he stood up at an event, a fundraiser for the program, and he said, I do the announcements at school every day, and let me finish by what I say every day. Do your homework, say your prayers at night, tell your parents you love them. There's lots of ways we can do these wonderful things, and I just appreciate hearing from all of you today. Ms. Kraft, with your programs, you are so focused on outcomes, and that to me is important, and the path to independence, not only for the child, but for their entire family. So how valuable are outcomes you see when you're able to provide these community-based support to foster youth?
Thank you, Member Westrope. The foster youth that we work with, starting from those who are very young, whether they're in foster care, kinship care, or their family is under the care of Child Protective Services, we provide a continuum of programs and supports. When children get to be between the ages of 12 and 17, they are provided with a therapeutic mentor. We call this person a special mentor who helps them with a variety of supports. Their academics, their social supports, their, any mediation that they need in school, they advocate for them. We have a special program for our youth that we partner with Chase Bank, and we provide them with a great deal of financial literacy and economic development. They get to open bank accounts. We put money in there. They learn about, how their career opportunities are related to their economic self-sufficiency and development. And as they work through these, this continuum of programs and services, we help them to plan for their future. So those who are interested in post-secondary education, we help to prepare them on that track. For those who are interested in other careers, we take them out to visit folks at the stadium. We take them out to visit folks at Chase Bank. We take them to the welding academy if they're interested in working with their hands. We have mentors from many different professional backgrounds that work with our kids, and each of them have an action plan that they set for themselves, and we provide programs and services to make sure that they're able to transition successfully into adulthood, and we stay with them as long as they need us. So it is voluntary.
I think that's huge because early on they're getting a vision of opportunity in their lives, and it's a great motivator. I'm an adoptive parent, Ms. Marquardt, and it's a beautiful thing. I've also you talk about alternative options for people. young mothers, never expected to be pregnant. My wife has volunteered at a pregnancy center. And, so we see young mothers who go on, have their child put up for adoption, just not in a position to be a mother at that time. There's no father. And later get married, have their own kids, and then adopt themselves. Could you comment on those opportunities and some of the blessings you see through this?
Absolutely. I think working in social welfare is really just an opportunity to see all of the good and the bad in the world. You really kind of see the best of both worlds. And some fabulous things that I've seen is foster parents or kinship or adoptive families that have really come back and have helped support other adoptive families in doing sort of like support groups. And I feel like that's been one of the most positive things that I've seen is that, really building that community around those families and providing support because, kiddos from foster care have trauma. So there's going to be some sort of possible behavior that comes with that and being able to support them so that it's not a disruption later on.
We're going to implement the 2-to-1 rule. We'll next go to Mr. Carey from Ohio and then to Ms. Chu from California.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this hearing to discuss ways we can modernize the child welfare system. And thank you to the panel. I'll try to get through all this. Child welfare policy has seen significant changes in recent years, but it's clear from our witnesses' testimony, and I assure you that we get these testimonies, and while I wasn't able to be here to listen to most of them, it's tough to read some of the stories, especially from you. Through the passing of the Family First Prevention Services Act, Congress has moved away from the historical practice of providing federal funding solely after a child entered foster care, and it moved towards evidence-based prevention services. These services support upstream interventions that prevent child abuse and neglect, like the 30 Days program to family programs. These open-ended prevention dollars mean that the states like Ohio can implement evidence-based programs such as the 30 Days to Family Protection Ohio that provide services and supports to families caring for children at risk of entering foster care. In Ohio, our Governor, Mike DeWine, has made significant investments in kinship care, and the state has an impressive structure for recruiting and retaining kinship providers. Family First Invest in Family Welfare has provided an opportunity to reevaluate state spending for child welfare and align fundings like Title 4B to complement the success of Family First. Ms. Marquardt, I was going to ask you some questions on some of the examples that you gave. Can't do it, so I'm going to stay on my prepared script. 30 Days to Family is an impressive evidence-based program and highlights how federal dollars should be further invested in programs that produce outcomes. Can you share more about the families you're able to serve under this program and are unique for other kinship programs?
Absolutely, thank you. So there's kind of two different options that we have. So we have informal kinship care and we have formal kinship care, which is when they come into the foster care system. And that's generally when 30 Days to Family gets involved, is at that initial meeting. So we're there and we're touching base with the family and we're making sure that they feel supported, that they know that they have somebody on their side. And we want to do nothing but locate a family member or a kinship resource that ideally the family's open to, sometimes not, depending on the relationship. And we just provide support to the family. We do have other programs similar to this that are Extreme Family Finding and then Kinship Navigator that also help support those families. But primarily that's what we're doing at the very, very beginning of a case, is just supporting the family and trying to locate any and all options with a minimum of locating 80 family members.
Okay. Ms. Kraft, how does SMART from the start help grow the capacity of individuals to make sure families are resilient? Do you offer job training to help link parents with future employers?
Absolutely. So upon voluntary intake into the Smart from the Start program, each family sets short-term and long-term goals. Their short-term goals are really to stabilize the family. So if they need food security, if they need housing security, that sort of thing. And then they set their long-term goals. So they're interested in a GED or a high set. They're interested in certain careers. And then we enroll them in our place-based career programs. So everyone gets professional development and enrichment, which are basic job skills. We go through interviewing, timeliness, all of those basic skills, and then they get to self-select. So we have a number of programs. We have CDL programs. We have early childhood, food handlers programs. We have management programs. We have coding and computer science programs where folks can get a certification, green cleaning. And then we have job developers who help to line folks up with jobs. And we have contracts with Enterprise and, Rent-A-Car. And the DC government also offers our families jobs. And we connect our families. Once we don't just give them a certification and send them out. We help our families to get into job situations, and then we provide them with economic development support, banking, budgeting, credit, first-time home buyers. So we literally guide them through each facet of entering professional development or adult education, all the way through obtaining a job and then working towards economic self-sufficiency and hopefully a path to the middle class.
What about transportation?
So we offer stipends for everything from lunch to transportation. We help with childcare, so we build a bridge if they need help with childcare until we're able to get them a subsidized childcare slot. We provide them with that. Just like the young man one of our young men that went to the Southeast Welding Academy, he needed a helmet and gear, and so we paid for those things. So we make sure they have everything they need to eliminate any barriers.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your indulgence. My time has expired. I just want to thank you all and for your testimonies. And at that, I yield back.
Thank you. Recognize Ms. Chu.
Dr. Sanders, the Indian Child Welfare Act is a federal law that protects Native children entering foster care by prioritizing placements with the child's family and tribal communities, which is an essential component of promoting kinship placements and preserving cultural identity. In 1994, Congress added a Title IV-B plan requirement directing states to develop an Indian Child Welfare Act, or ICWA, implementation plan in consultation with the tribes. But 30 years later, Native children continue to be disproportionately represented in the foster care system, with higher rates of entry and longer lengths of stay. In California, they are 4.5 times more likely to enter care than their counterparts, despite being such a smaller portion of the population. That is because, despite the requirement under Title IV-B, federal oversight of states' compliance with this requirement is unclear and not always exercised. That's why I introduced a bipartisan bill along with Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska, H.R. 3461, the Strengthening Tribal Families Act, to assist state child welfare agencies in implementing federal protections for tribal children by strengthening the reporting requirements for ICWA in Title IV-B. This bill does not create a new mandate, but merely carries out the original intent of the law by bringing ICWA into the larger child welfare system within the Department of Health and Human Services. So can you talk about how clarifying HHS's role in oversight of current Title IV-B plan requirements related to ICWA implementation could help states and improve outcomes for tribal children and families?
Thank you, Representative Chu, for the question. And I would just mention a couple of things. I mentioned earlier the reduction that's occurred in out-of-home care across the general population from 2005 to 2001, or to 2021. While there's been a reduction in American Indian children, it's much smaller than the general population. And it's not a perfect example of how well Indian Child Welfare Act is carried out, but I think it reflects the concerns that you've raised. One of the issues has been historically the question of who has oversight authority at the federal level. Is it Health and Human Services? Is it Interior? Is it anybody? And at this point, really, there has not been a consistent action demonstrating that oversight by anybody at the federal level. And so I do believe that clarifying whose responsibility it is would be critical. My experience, I prior to coming to Casey, I was child welfare director in both Los Angeles and in Minnesota. And the Indian Child Welfare Act takes effort on the part of a state to fully implement. And so without the kind of oversight that the federal government's providing, it's going to be very difficult for states, even the most motivated, to provide the necessary services that are part of Indian Child Welfare Act.
Thank you for that. Ms. Marquardt, you provide many striking and dramatic examples of what you weren't prepared for as a caseworker for these children, including saying that you weren't prepared to have a child on your caseload who was having surgery without any parent at all, and you took it upon yourself to sleep with that child because you didn't want him to be alone. And you have many examples of where you went above and beyond. But then you also, as a caseworker, remember having nightmares about various parents wanting to hurt you, threaten you, or sue you. And so you remind me of the child welfare professionals in my area of Los Angeles County who describe similar burnout. And in fact, in LA County, we have one of the largest county-governed agencies in the country, and we're responsible for the welfare of over 2 million children. How would an increase in Title IV-B funds for recruitment, training, and retention of staff help? How would it help to improve mental health support and self-care resources for these professionals and reduce burnout and improve retention?
Absolutely. I think specifically if you can get to a manageable number on your caseload, your retaining staff, they're able to have a manageable caseload of 15 to 20, then they're able to appropriately supervise and care for the children on their caseload. They are the legal guardian. In fact, they're the parent of that child at that time. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't parent 30 children. So I think if you're able to really focus on the retention and really dig in a little bit more on appropriate training at the beginning of when you're hiring new staff, I think that would really be beneficial.
Would mental health resources help?
Absolutely. I think if you can provide some additional, mainly focusing on secondary trauma, because that's what is happening, then really being able to provide the mental health services would retain the staff and would create better outcomes for the children.
Thank you.
Recognize Mr. Moore of Utah.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate all the witnesses being here today. This is tough work, and it's incredibly important. Thank you for your tireless work on this issue. Director Tracy Gruber, a personal thank you for being here with your exceptional team from Utah. It'll come as no surprise to my colleagues that I oftentimes mention all the ways that Utah leads the nation in all the categories. This one really matters, though, that Utah has shown that we have an exceptional approach, strong leadership in placing with timely placements and safe and proper family reunification. I can't think of a better area to lead than doing that. I know that the team here that you have is passionate about this, and just thank you for the involvement. So you focus on results, you focus on reunification, you focus on kinship. You've talked to me about all of this. I want to ask a question. There's been challenges, though. You're doing a lot of great things in Utah, but there's obviously key challenges. Highlight some of those for us, and just share for us how you're overcoming those.
Thank you so much, Representative Moore, and just a personal thanks to you as well for being so interested and really a leader in our state on this issue. There are challenges, and I think they are worth highlighting. Of course, there's challenges with what's going on with families in general right now. We know our system, and I think nationally it's a challenge as well, that we're seeing increasingly youth with behaviorally complex conditions. The causes of that, I think, we're all still trying to grapple with. That creates a challenge for finding foster care placements and recruiting families that have the skills. It also creates challenges for our workforce who may need different training to address the needs of those youth. We also have extremely high turnover, and I don't think Utah is unique with that. Our caseworker turnover rate is 51%. Our frontline staff turnover rate is 37%. We know how important the caseworker is to get the outcomes that we all want. Then, of course, there's the administrative challenges that I briefly touched on at the very beginning. You've got a very complex funding system. Just in Title IV-B, you've got funding that was from a line from the 1930s, and then one from 1993, different definitions, different reports. How do we overcome all of this? Well, proper training for our staff using Title IV-B funds has been critical, and more can be done there. We have an extensive administrative infrastructure just to handle our federal grants. We have about 20 full-time staff just to handle that piece. That is how we're overcoming the administrative challenge, quite honestly. You've got to have the staff in order to ensure we're accountable to all of you for our funding. And then we're braiding and blending funding. These are individuals and families with very complex needs. They are not just needs within the child welfare system. And we as a state are very focused with the leadership of Governor Cox to come together across the executive branch and braid funding, and certainly doing it within Title IV-B and IV-E primarily.
As you focus on measuring outcomes for Title IV-B, is there one or two specific things that we need to be focused on at the federal level?
I think the keeping families stable and safe children is paramount. I mean, we're all talking about child well-being here. So keeping children safely in their homes, I think, is the most critical outcome. And when they can't be, making sure that they're stabilized in their placement, and ideally getting those families back to the point that the child could be reunified. And those are the outcomes that we really are focused on in Utah.
Thank you so much. Final question from Ms. Carr. Last Congress, I introduced the Connecting Forever Families Act to expedite the process for placing those in foster care systems for support of forever homes. This Congress, our work is going to continue on that. Any specific improvements or innovations that you believe could enhance the court improvement and its impact on these cases?
Thank you, Congressman, both for the question and for supporting the court improvement program through the legislation that you've introduced previously. I think one of the things that you had highlighted in that legislation was greater investment in technology to build on what we've learned from the past several years. There's a lot of takeaways for our legal system writ large, but especially for child welfare cases related to times when the use of technology can really expedite a case and make sure that we don't have delays that are unnecessary. In terms of party participation, we've also seen a lot of opportunities for engaging both the children and youth who are a part of these cases and parents, as well as other participants in these hearings, if they choose to do so by remote technology. So that's one area. And then I think another really pivotal topic that's come up a couple of times today is about access to counsel, and especially when sort of looking at different types of access to counsel, both before there is a removal decision that occurs. There's a number of CIPs around the country that have been investing in small-scale models right now of what we call pre-petition or preventive legal advocacy, and building up on some of those models, I think, would be a terrific area to develop more resources and more contributions from the CIPs going forward.
Thank you. We'll keep going down that path. Appreciate it. Thank you, witnesses.
Mr. Smucker of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. Thank you for scheduling this hearing, and thank you to each of the witnesses for the work that you do and for taking your time to hold this discussion. I think it's important we hear from you as we look at reauthorization to understand how we can improve the program to ensure that care is delivered as effectively and efficiently as possible. I talked recently, or heard recently, from the Lancaster County. I represent 11th District in Pennsylvania, the Lancaster County Children and Youth, which is the child welfare agency there. And similar to some of your testimony, they described sort of the complications, the difficulties that they face with accessing federal funding from many different programs, and each one has their own requirements, own reporting mechanisms. And in fact, this agency said that they actually employ a fiscal staff, 7 people, just to track which pot of money they're accessing, where the money's coming from, what requirements it entails, and other details. There's another program in my district, Thrive to 5. They said they have a finance team of 10 individuals. Again, just to manage the federal funding requirements. So, let's streamline this thing, because if we can do that, both of those organizations, and probably yours as well, could spend more time meeting the needs of each family rather than spending all the time on administrative work. So I see a lot of heads nodding. Does that sound familiar to each of you? So I do think it's really important as we look at this, how we can help you better deliver your services. I think, Ms. Gruber, I'll ask you, we're looking at several different subparts here, Title 4B, and other subparts. Do you think they could be combined? Do you think that would help streamline it? What should we be looking at? What suggestions do you have?
Thank you, and yes, all of the above. I think if you're just looking at Title 4B, is one funding stream that through authorization you have the ability to actually address. I think combining subparts A and B, establishing clear outcomes, combining definitions, making sure that those definitions are the same, and reporting requirements. And your example is spot on. We have over 20 staff just administering federal funds. We're a small state, and the administrative burden is significant, and it takes away from the frontline workers. For one of our funding streams, not this one, but for foster care, our staff are tracking 196 different data indicators. It might be time to evaluate whether or not those indicators are actually necessary to ensure the health and safety of the children that are in the child welfare system.
I think it's certainly I'm sure you agree with all of us that we do need accountability. We want to ensure that the programs are working well, that there's accountability for the federal dollars. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Like, how can we streamline things? How can we reduce the requirements, the regulations, but still ensure that there's accountability in the program?
Absolutely, there has to be accountability, and all the states would understand that there needs to be accountability, and the accountability has to be balanced with making sure that the health and safety of the kids are met, which is all of our objectives, and keeping them in safe and stable families, and evaluating the various reporting requirements is one way to streamline. With Title 4B specifically, just reorganizing the structure, given that they were 2 subparts at very different times in our country, 1935 and I think 1993. It now is a great opportunity for reauthorization to revise that framework, and maybe even consider, as I provided in my written testimony, an opportunity for us to pilot some comprehensive approaches that allow us, with outcomes defined by policymakers, to maybe think creatively and allow states to innovate to meet the needs of their populations.
Well, I'm out of time. I had some additional questions, but I think this is really important as we consider reauthorization, that we have this good discussion. So I think your input's going to be really, really important going forward. And again, I thank each of you for being here.
Thank you. Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, and all of the committee members who really see this as an extremely important part of our jobs and policy. Let me just thank all of the witnesses. Wish I had more than 5 minutes because I have questions for each and every one of you. I just want to point out, Ms. Kraft, Ms. Gruber, I want to especially thank you, Ms. Kraft, Ms. Marquardt as well, because you guys are kind of the frontline workers, And I was just noting your testimony, Ms. Marquardt. We need to support the staff more too. You said you just weren't prepared to attend the trial of a rapist of a 12-year-old child on your caseload and have her describe the attack. You weren't prepared for some young man to say he had 3 pairs of underwear and turned it inside out, and you rushed out with your own money to buy him some underwear. Just thank you all for really your stewardship. And I hear that the Utah program is something we ought to all go visit to see how you do it, despite your acknowledgement that it's legally and administratively complex. And I want to thank you too, Ms. Gruber. So, Mr. Chairman, before I start, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a document titled Focus 4 on Families. It's a consensus recommendation regarding 4B reauthorization from dozens of nonpartisan and bipartisan child welfare advocacy organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Children's Defense Fund, 0 to 3, blah, blah, blah. And, and it really sort of summarizes what some of our guests have said here today. Let me just start out with you. It's going to be kind of Dr. Sanders and Ms. Beedler Carr. I'm not as good at organizing my 5 minutes as other people are. But Dr. Sanders, you said something in your written testimony about child protective agencies can learn much from other safety critical industries such as aviation, healthcare, and nuclear power that have applied the principles of safety science to change organizational structure, improve practice, and reduce the incident of tragic outcomes. And I'm going to tell you why I'm asking this question. You talked about reducing foster care. We talk about how African Americans and Native Americans and so are overrepresented in the system and how we need to do kinship care better. But someone on the ground might have a difficult time sort of trying to discern who's really in danger and needs to be removed and who needs to stay in there. What would just briefly, if you can, share with us an example of how these the safety, a safety person from other occupations has informed you all about how to do this?
Thank you, Representative Moore, for the question. And I would just reference some of the things that Ms. Marquardt, I believe, talked about, that what happens in most agencies is that workers are far overburdened, and they have a number of children to attend to. With each of those children, they have a number of actions to attend to, and end up caught day to day dealing with crises on an ongoing basis. They have little ability and time to step back and say, who's really at risk here? Who needs the services that we have to offer, and who doesn't? And oftentimes, and there have been several questions about mental health, oftentimes other agencies haven't been prepared to provide the support necessary, so it falls on the child protection worker. And because of that, they miss things. They miss something that they could have picked up had they had the time. And that's the same that happens in many other industries. Unfortunately, in child protection, if workers miss things, they're fired.
I got you. I want to ask, I want to thank you for that, Dr. Sanders. I want to ask Ms. Beedler Carr. We have heard a lot about how the definition of neglect should be changed, like willful neglect, to sort of prevent some of these removals from a home. I'll give you an example. With your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. Just say, for example, you're a mom and you're doing happy hour or something. You're a barmaid and you're working from 5 to 9. You got an 11-year-old who's 11 and 9 months old and a 2-year-old. And so in order to run right around the corner, you willfully leave your 11 and 9-month-old at home with the 2-year-old. They're perfectly safe. This 11-year-old, almost 12, has been kind of adultified. And say some, ex-husband, ex-boyfriend or somebody, they get mad and call and tell on her that she's leaving these two together. That's an example legally of willful neglect. And, how this definition forces somebody on the ground to take action because it actually statutorily is a problem. Should we change and look toward what willful neglect really is? Because, here it would be a lot more damage to take one or both of those kids away, probably. You need to find some child care for this woman. This is not a case of childhood abuse or neglect. Probably, let me let you answer before the chairman gavels me to death.
Sure, I'll be very brief. Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. The short answer is we very much support reexamination of these definitions. There's a lot of states right now, including several represented here, that are reexamining these definitions. But I want to underscore, especially on this panel with these colleagues, how so much of it comes down not just to the definition under law, but to the training and to the support that frontline providers, judges, and attorneys all have on what those definitions mean and how to interpret them. Thank you.
So that would be somebody's assessment, Dr. Sanders. Somebody might say, girl, you just need to figure out how to get a babysitter, but we're not going to take your kids from you just because Mr. Bugaboo was mad and found a way to retaliate.
Right. There's lots of variation in the subjectivity.
Right.
And that's where I think it's such an important component of training, that there's legal training in addition to the social services training.
Oh, I wish I could go on. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I'll recognize Ms. Tenney of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and thank you to the witnesses. Before I get started, I just would like to ask permission of the chair to enter into the record a report prepared by the Congressional Research Service entitled Side-by-Side Comparison of Title IV-B Formula Grant Programs for Child and Family Services. This 34-page report I have here provides a comprehensive comparison of the two subparts in Title IV-B called the Child Welfare Services and the Promoting Safe and Stable Families.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to thank all of the witnesses for what you do today. In my first life as an attorney, I did a lot of pro bono work for what was the Legal Aid Society in New York and spent a lot of time in family court. Most of my, I started initially with paid clients, and then I did the pro bono work for family court. So I want to thank you, for all of you, for what you do in every aspect of this very, very important work. This isn't about people showing up for a job. Once you get into this field, it's a calling. It's about saving families and children, and I can't think of any more important work that are happening in our communities, and that's why it's so important that some of these, the reauthorization, the funding that we put forth, is consistent and serves and meets the needs of the people who, like you all, that are serving. And I was gonna jump to a question first. I'd love to ask you all a question. Ms. Moore, I know how you feel. There's just a lot here, and it's so important. But I wanted to go to Ms. Gruber first, and you alluded to this just a few minutes ago about this overlap and the confusion. And if we do a reauthorization, how can we better, and I know you kind of touched on it, but can you give me some specifics of how we can repurpose in a reauthorization these two sources of funding that some are mandatory, some are discretionary? How can we do that in a streamlined way for efficiencies and also to provide more resources for you on the front lines?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in terms of specifics on streamlining, it's very complicated, and I've mentioned this, to have just in that funding stream that is, again, only 2.5% of Utah's child welfare budget to handle those issues. Common definitions, one pool of funding with specifically defined outcomes that the states can leverage, and then reporting to those outcomes would be the primary way to streamline, to afford states the most flexibility that Congress is allowing to be afforded so that we can meet the needs of our population, which are all going to be different.
Can you just comment on the interaction? And Utah is very different. I come from the state of New York. The interaction between the state and the federal funding and how these localities can better access the funding, including some of the matches that come through on other programs.
Yeah, I think that being able to match the federal dollars and putting up that match is one of the complexities, and it's different. The allocations are different even in subparts A and B. And being able to manage that, having one allocation formula with financing related to that is one streamline that can absolutely take place. And they're all different across all the federal funds, and these are complex families. We're leveraging dollars not just from child welfare, but through TANF and child care development block grants and a whole multitude of funding streams in order to meet the needs of these families.
Can you cite the one thing that you think, if you had to pick one thing that we could fix and make this program better in terms of consolidating and streamlining?
Eliminate the set-asides.
Thank you. Good. I appreciate that. One last question. For Ms. Beedler Carr, I appreciate you being in court. I know how difficult this is. Can you just give us, and I don't have much time left, but just a quick overview of what's happening with the interactions with families as they go through the court system, the discretion of judges. I know my colleague Ms. Moore referred to discretion of judges, and I mean these issues are really complex. They are, every family's different. I mean it's you could do an encyclopedia on what happens in family court and happens in these really sensitive issues. But if you could just give us some, what are we seeing, and is there any discretion or any guidelines we could give to the judicial system to make this easier as well, including redefining some of the key terms?
Sure, thank you for the question, and thank you for your own background, having been in family court. So I think the best way to answer this question is to just frame sort of what the sequence of events is for a family and when the court is most likely to become involved. So you have a mandated report typically initiates the Child Protective Services involvement. That can come from a school, it can come from a medical professional, it can come from social services or law enforcement. Then Child Protective Services decides whether to do an investigation. Through that investigation, they decide whether to provide preventive services or initiate a petition for removal. All of that happens before the court is even involved. Typically, a court isn't going to actually be involved and see that child, see that family until after a removal has already occurred. And in many instances, that happens well after the removal has occurred. So under law, there's a lot of variation across the states where some courts will oversee the removal and confirm whether the removal needed to happen within 24 hours. Other jurisdictions, it's 48. Others, it's up to 3 weeks by law before they have to have a judicial order sort of confirming that removal should have happened. So there's a lot of things after that then the judge has responsibility under both state and federal law for overseeing implementation of placement. It depends, again, on state law. But there's a lot of sort of variation in the way that it all happens. I think going to your sort of second part of that question about ways to implement change, one of the things that we would like to see is greater guidance and clarity around court oversight over that initial removal decision. I think there's a lot of circumstances.
Let me ask you, I know my time's expired. Isn't that something that would be a state issue, though? Would be each state would be enacting. Is there a model legislation on this that's something we could look to, to at least provide guidance to the states? And then I have to yield my time. I apologize. Thank you.
Yes, and it's an excellent question coming from New York, because New York does have some models, especially New York City on that would be great to look to. Thank you.
Again. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Evans of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sanders, in your testimony, you suggested that we should engage individuals with lived experience at all levels of the family first approach. You can also say that peer mentors are important to helping navigate this system. Can you describe how mentoring services for youth or parents interact with Title 4B, help those generally supported reunification and family preservation? How can you better incorporate peer mentoring and partners with implementing the policies that we are discussing today?
Thank you very much, Representative Evans. There are examples in jurisdictions across the country where the parents who have been through the child protection system or youth who have been through are assigned as mentors or peers to those who are going through the system today. And many of those examples have found that the experience is much better for the youth or the parent who's going through when they have a mentor, because they are able to talk to somebody who's had a similar experience. They're able to understand what's happening to them and understand more directly from those who've experienced it. And so we've seen in some jurisdictions, the length of time that children spend in care is shortened. And so the use of peers and or mentors is for those with lived experience is something that we have supported quite strongly.
Dr. Sanders, funding for Title IV-B has remained at its current level since 2006, barring occasionally a modest annual appropriation increase. How has levels of funding impacted mentoring programs around the country? Have you noticed any significant impacts, specifically communities of color?
The use of mentors at this point is funded through vehicles like 4B or through state or local funding. And so there isn't a required funding. And so many states would say, and many jurisdictions would say, that that's one of the challenges in the development of mentoring programs is a lack of resources that are really dedicated specifically for that purpose. So it in my view, has had an impact on the initiation of those programs and expansion across the country.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I recognize Ms. Miller of West Virginia.
Thank you, Chairman LaHood, and thank you, Ranking Member Davis, for letting me be here as part of this committee today. And thank you to all of you all for what you do and the time that you have spent coming here to talk about this important issue. As a mother and a grandmother, I understand that children need to grow up in a safe and stable household. And because of one of the many hats I've worn throughout my life, I was able to stay at home with my children and still work out of the house. And so I became that mother that walked the halls in the middle school or picked up the kids and took them places. So I was exposed from the time my children were little to many different households. And there were children who knew that they could come play in my basement and be safe. And I still have wonderful relationships with those children today, and they're in their 40s. Because it's so important for children to understand love and understand security and know that they're okay where they are. Ms. Kraft, I want to thank you for sharing your lifetime of work serving children and communities, because we all know that the child welfare workforce is struggling to meet all the needs of the children and their families. The caseloads and the jobs duties that are expected of these caseworkers is such a heavy burden that they carry with them at all time. And many of the examples that Ms. Marquardt shared from her time as a caseworker also highlight the need for innovation in child welfare services. Caseworkers' capacity is absolutely stretched to the limits, and many cannot connect families to the necessary wraparound services and support that they need to prevent entry into child welfare. We should leverage technology to support families in real time and to prevent entry into child welfare. Earlier this year, I introduced the Helping Hands for Family Act, and my bill would permit states to use already allocated money to access online portals that connect families in need with resources. And this tool is designed to connect families with community-based providers, such as pregnancy centers, childcare programs, food pantries, churches, and nonprofits, as well as provide the one-on-one interactions to support families who are facing difficulties. In your experience, I guess this is for Ms. Gruber, sorry. In your experience, serving at-risk communities, how important is one-on-one interaction and case management in helping individuals and ensuring children are safe? And how do you think online platforms can help connect families to resources, much like that you offer at your center? And would it alleviate the child workforce crisis?
Thank you for that question. I think the one-on-one case management is incredibly important, and leveraging the voice of the families in that one-on-one case management, and has been previously described, is really important. In terms of online applications at the state government level, we welcome the ability to innovate and try to figure out what's going to get the best outcomes for the families that we serve.
Thank you for that answer. Now to talk about court improvement programs. The courts play a huge role, as we know from other people's experience, in overseeing the success of foster care placements. Last Congress, I introduced the Strengthening Courts for Kids and Families Act, and my bill would reauthorize the court improvement program through 2027, and it provides courts with the ability to implement training for judges, attorneys, and other legal personnel, as well as improve parent, family, and youth engagement in child welfare proceedings. And I'm really excited to work with Congressman Blake Moore on introducing this bill. So, Ms. Carr, thank you. Could you share an example of how the court improvement program has been particularly effective in improving child welfare cases in a specific state or context?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman Miller. And thank you for having introduced that legislation previously and continuing to work on reauthorization. I do have several examples. One of the beauties of the court improvement program is that every state has a court improvement program director. And those directors are extraordinary individuals who do a lot of work and who responded very quickly when I reached out to all of them and asked them to give me some talking points. So I can give you some data from West Virginia in particular. West Virginia has been doing a lot of work, consistent, again, with one of the themes that we've heard about around workforce development issues and issues in particular of recruitment and retention of legal professionals to go into this space. There's been a really big challenge, as in many other states, around that issue. And so they've been holding a number of collaborative engagements with law schools and other legal services providers throughout the state in order to try to fill some gaps. And having an entity like the Court Improvement Program, already established as a part of the Supreme Court in the state has just made a huge difference in being able to address that issue.
Well, thank you. I actually live right on the Ohio River, and so being in a tri-state, we're directly affected by Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia, and share the children and the issues. And it is so interesting to see what might go on in Ohio that doesn't happen yet in West Virginia, or vice versa, in so many ways. But thank you all for letting me be in here today, and I yield back my time.
I now recognize Mr. Stube. Mr. Stube, I think you were the first one here today, and thank you and Ms. Miller for waving on to the committee today to be a part of it. You're not part of the subcommittee, but it says a lot that both of you wanted to be here. So thanks for your patience, Greg, and being here, and for sticking around.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for allowing me to wave on to talk about a bill that I've worked on that's important to the state of Florida and homes that we have. And I'll talk briefly about the Florida Sheriff's Youth Ranch. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of H.R. 3852, offered by myself and Mr. Dunn of Florida. This bipartisan bill, H.R. 3852, the Creating Accountable, Respectful Environments for Children Act, addresses the shortage of foster home options for children by allowing cottage homes to be eligible for federal funds that other programs already have access to. This bill is simple, straightforward, and direct. The bill simply adds cottage family homes to the options of federally supported housing for foster children. Make no mistake, our country is facing a foster care crisis. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record a recent news article entitled "Inside America's Critical Shortage of Foster Homes," which reads, "There's a critical shortage of foster homes. More than half of all states saw a significant decline in licensed foster homes last year. Some states saw cuts as high as 61%.
Without objection.
I'd also like to enter into the record an NPR article titled "Kids Housed in Casino Hotels." It's a workaround as USC's decline in foster homes.
Without objection.
Casino hotel rooms, is that really the best option for our children? Cottage family homes offer a family-like living environment in a single-family residence with no more than 2 children per bedroom unless it is in the children's best interest. For example, in the case of keeping biological siblings together. The cottage parents can supervise and nurture around the clock, creating a healthier, stable environment. Critics of this bill attempt to tint the good deeds of this model by incorrectly asserting cottage homes are not safe. Make no mistake, the safety, health, and general well-being of children is critically important. My bill stipulates requiring the implementation of a trauma-informed approach to care, prohibiting the use of seclusion, mechanical or chemical restraints, requiring providers to have a system in place for children to alert a staff person if they have concerns or feel that have been unfairly denied their rights, requiring continuous quality improvement methodology that regularly solicits information from children concerning their perceptions of the quality of care. I have the honor in the state of Florida, we have Florida Sheriff's Youth Ranches, and I've seen firsthand, my family's in law enforcement, my brother's a deputy, my father's a former sheriff, and seeing the impact that it's had on kids that have been a part of these group homes, these cottage homes, where there's a parent, family, familial unit that is taking care of multiple different kids. And the kids tend to be a little older, not your younger kids, your kids that have trouble in middle school or high school. And it's just a great environment. It lowers recidivism rates and has great outcomes. And to not include them in federal funding, I think, is a mistake and an opportunity to be able to close this gap on the 61% of the need in foster homes. The time is now to solve this crisis. I look forward to working with the subcommittee to pass this bill and protect our children. I appreciate your time, and since I have 2 minutes left, quickly I'll ask Ms. Marquardt. Thank you for sharing your experience as a caseworker. We know caseworkers have a challenging job and often receive little recognition. What do you think some of the common misconceptions or challenges are that caseworkers specifically face, and how can Congress better support them in the child welfare system?
Thank you for your question. I think the best way to support the caseworkers is by, one, trying to retain staff, and the best way to do that is to be able to provide better training so that people are more prepared when they're coming into that position, and then additionally providing mental health services so that when they are feeling burnout and they're on the verge of that, they're able to get that appropriate care so that they do have the ability to continue to provide appropriate services for the children.
Thank you. And in the minute I have left, Mrs. Carr, I'll yield to you since I'm the last person to speak on the dais. If there's anything you'd like to add to the conversation in 52 seconds, you've got the floor.
Oh, how fun. I wish I was at my family dinner table and got that. No, I just want to say an enormous thank you to all of you for your engagement in this issue, and Chairman, to you and your team for pulling this together, Ranking Member Davis, for your longstanding commitment to this work. It really means a lot that you've held this hearing today, so thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stubbe, and we look forward to working with you on your bill that you mentioned today. That concludes our question and answers today. Let me just thank all of you for the valuable conversation today, the dialogue, discussion, you answering the questions, giving us feedback so that we can look at how we make positive changes when it comes to 4B. And so we're grateful for your perspective today. And so I look forward, obviously, to working with Ranking Member Davis and my colleagues across the aisle to reauthorize and strengthen 4B. Just remind members, please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal record. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you all.